I am currently in a state of solitude in my domicile, engaged in a gaming activity on a large screen display, consuming 2 cold beverages and more in a mini fridge situated adjacent to my preferred chair. It is, however, evident that this is not one of those sales calls or robocalls that I have previously experienced. The time is approximately 8 p.m. On Wednesday, my wife Tracy often worked late, and I often made plans for a fun and relaxing evening. Today was special. I ordered a meatball pizza from Papa John's, consumed a couple of beers, then turned on the Cubs game and began relaxing with my preferred beverage. I had 2 more bottles in the small refrigerator next to me and 6 more in the kitchen refrigerator. It should be a good evening. My wife arrived at approximately 10 o'clock, took a quick shower, and by about 11, on Wednesday night, the atmosphere at the Irondales was relatively calm. However, a telephone call soon disrupted my enjoyment of the evening. Despite my initial suspicion that the call might be of an urgent nature, I answered it anyway. The caller was Sherry, the wife of Trace's boss, Jack. She was visibly distressed. Jack had suffered a heart attack while working with Tracy. My wife had immediately called 911 and was taken to the hospital. The hospital was reached by paramedics in a condition that could be described as poor. Sherry informed me that Tracy had accompanied Jack in the ambulance and that she would be required to return home since Sherry intended to remain with Jack for as long as necessary. I informed her that I was en route and extended my best wishes to Jack. Jack had been Trace's superior for 22 years. She had commenced her employment at his software company shortly after completing her college education and was now his. She was Jack's assistant and, in a sense, his work wife. I had already met Tracy when she started working for Jack. Over the years, our families often did things together. He seemed like a nice guy. Tracy said he was an amazing boss and that he also took good care of her in the payroll department. Jack is a French citizen who is 10 years older than Tracy. I am 50, and he is 55. He is a physically fit man for his age and possesses a charismatic personality. He is the center of attention in any setting, attracting the attention of both men and women. I believe that God has a plan for each of us, regardless of our circumstances. However, I was surprised to learn that he had suffered a heart attack. I parked my vehicle in the visitors' parking area. I proceeded to the parking lot adjacent to the emergency room and inquired about Jack. I informed the nurse at the counter that I was the husband of the woman who had arrived with him and that I was also searching for her. As I did so, I observed a couple of EMTs to my right. One gently patted the other on the forearm and whispered in a voice loud enough for me to hear, "Cook is here." I wonder what's. Despite his gaze being directed towards me, I remained unaware of his intentions. I was unfamiliar with the term cook and had no inclination to inquire further. My sole objective was to locate Tracy. 5 minutes later, Tracy and Sherry exited the room, their faces streaked with tears. They noticed my presence and proceeded to approach me. We engaged in a brief yet emotional embrace. He wailed, barely audible as we embraced. He had died a few minutes ago. The doctor had said it was a massive heart attack. I was stunned by the silence as the 3 of us hugged in the hallway. Both women were sobbing loudly. Sherry, also a French citizen, had been married to Jacku for 35 years. They had married when they were both 20 and had immigrated to this country when Jacku had taken a job with. At the advent of the computer age, the American software company was founded. The daughter of the company's founder, AA, is 3 years older than my daughter, Allison, who is 18. The girls are so similar that they could be sisters. Jax held a special affection for AA, and this will be a challenging period for her. At that moment, one of the EMTs approached me and inquired if I was Trace's husband. I confirmed that I was. He then handed me Trace's purse, stating that she had left it in the ambulance upon their arrival at the hospital. I excused myself from the group of women who were still in a state of distress and, taking the purse in my left hand, thanked him and shook his right hand with mine. I then began wrapping the dangling strap around the purse to get it out of the way when I thought I saw a bra tucked into the middle compartment. Did not make sense to me, so I took another look and indeed found a bra in the purse. When the women left the room crying, I did not have an opportunity to observe Tracy closely. However, I did notice that she was not wearing a bra, which seemed unusual. I am unsure how long we remained in the hospital with Sherry before she opted to leave. Amy was preparing to return from university the following morning, and Sherry decided that she needed to rest. I dropped Sherry off at her residence and then drove Tracy and me to our home. I believed that I could assist both women in retrieving their vehicles the following day, Sherry from the emergency room parking lot and Tracy from the workplace parking lot. She did not utter a single word to me as we proceeded to enter the domicile and proceeded directly to the master bathroom, where she proceeded to enter the shower. Approximately 20 minutes later, she joined me in the living room, her eyes exhibiting the telltale signs of recent weeping, namely redness and puffiness. She took a seat on the couch and arose from my chair and joined her, embracing her in a supportive gesture. She was breathing in a somewhat ragged manner. I could discern her body shaking with sobs. I was tempted to inquire about her lack of undergarment, given her purported obligation to work with Jax, but I lacked the courage to do so at that moment. Instead, I held her in silence for another 20 minutes until she indicated her fatigue and expressed her intention to retire. It was midnight, so I decided to join her in bed the following morning. The following morning, after showering and shaving, I offered to take Tracy to the office to pick up the car. She suddenly appeared to be taken aback and began to stutter before taking a moment to catch her breath and calm down. Instead, she requested that I take her to Sherry's and they would take a taxi to the office and retrieve some of Jack's belongings. Tracy will then take Sherry to the hospital to complete the necessary paperwork and retrieve Jack's personal belongings. I offered my assistance, but was promptly declined. This proved to be a fortuitous turn of events for me. I needed to locate the EMTs who were on duty the previous night and obtain the requisite information. After dropping Tracy off at Sherry's and receiving a concise update on her condition, I proceeded to do so. I proceeded directly to the hospital in my vehicle. I promptly ascertained the names of the emergency physicians who had treated Jackson the previous day. They informed me of their whereabouts. I located my targets on the fire escape, where I had been directed, and they recalled me from the night before. I observed the individual who had handed me Tracy's purse. His name tag identified him as Rob. I inquired of Rob, in a direct and concise manner, the precise location of the race's commencement. He then abruptly shifted his gaze towards me, displaying a discernible hint of suspicion. My wife and Jaxu were scheduled to be engaged in their assigned duties, yet it would appear that they were not transported to Softal. Might I inquire as to whether this was the reason for your telephone call? In a somewhat agitated tone, he responded, I did not intend to convey any personal slight. He proceeded to voice his disquiet at the recent influx of such cases. In cases where the two individuals checking into a room are not husband and wife, and when the situation reaches a critical point, we are often perceived as the perpetrators. It is essential to maintain composure and refrain from hasty judgments. I am not attempting to place blame on you for any actions. My objective is to uncover the truth. I had to research the meaning of cook and found the definition to be disturbing. However, I do not believe this is your responsibility. It is my responsibility to ascertain whether you picked them up at Softal. We did not pick them up at Softal. Rob, I believe that they were engaged in this activity for approximately 15 minutes when the individual suddenly collapsed on top of your wife. She was forced to push him away to reach the phone and call 911. She then provided him with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. To be continued. Mouth resuscitation was performed on the subject, who was barely alive when taken to the emergency room. The information provided was deemed sufficient, and the subject was thanked and released. As the subject was leaving, it was observed that they were the subject of pity from the attending medical personnel. While driving home, the subject experienced a loss of orientation and cognitive function. It was subsequently determined that Tracy was engaging in sexual intercourse with Jax at the time of the subject's cardiac arrest. I was left to ponder the duration of this situation. It was not until a sudden realization that I became aware of the truth. Org Allison and their daughter Amy were not mere coincidences, they were, in fact, sisters. Tracy had engaged in sexual intercourse with him for a minimum of 19 years. How could I have remained unaware of this information for so long? I was, without a doubt, an extremely naive individual. She and Jokshi frequently worked late, at least once a week, and sometimes twice. She also attended the occasional bachelorette party or other social gathering. It is perplexing to consider whether she was engaging in sexual intercourse with him during this time. Additionally, it is curious to speculate about the nature of their relationship during business trips they took together. It is difficult to comprehend how Sherry could have remained unaware of the circumstances. I acknowledge that I am not always the most informed individual, but it is surprising that a woman could be so uninformed. This is particularly evident when one considers the striking resemblance between the two girls and the frequency with which Sherry was present in the office. I had assumed that they were merely good friends, based on the apparent closeness between them. How could Tracy have engaged in such a betrayal of trust? When I returned home, I discovered Tracy's vehicle in the garage, with Sherry seated inside. I was in the living room, drinking wine from a glass, when she entered. She seemed to perceive my expression as indicating distress. "What happened?" she asked. Despite my desire to maintain composure, my anger overwhelmed me, and I found myself unable to control my emotions. "How long did you have sex with Jack?" I blurted out, my voice laden with venom. As I turned, I could feel the heat of my anger radiating from my body. "Did he not tell you that he is Allison's father?" Tracy abruptly stood from the couch, dropping her wine glass in the process. "How could you divulge such distressing information to me?" she demanded, her voice rising in intensity. She paused, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that seemed capable of inflicting harm. I was prepared to stand my ground and maintain my composure. I was confident in the accuracy of my assertions and determined to hold my position. However, I lowered the volume of my voice to a near whisper as I hissed, "Tell me to kiss your ass, but don't you dare lie to me and tell me I'm wrong. I'll ram your teeth down your throat if you lie." In the 20 years of our marriage and relationship, I have never raised my voice at my wife, let alone threatened her with physical harm. Her reaction was one of complete shock. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then seemed to realize that I was serious. She was rendered speechless, and she also quickly moved away from me. Perhaps it was the intensity of my gaze that prompted her to do so. I informed her that she was responsible for his demise, and she sat back down on the sofa, ignoring the spilled wine on the carpet. The stress of the deception, combined with the physical exertion, was probably too much for her. Given the duration of their sexual relationship, it is surprising that this incident did not occur sooner. From her stricken expression, I could discern that I had touched a nerve. She gazed down at her hands and fidgeted for what seemed like minutes, but in reality, it was probably only 10 seconds. "Do you truly believe that I am responsible for his demise?" she inquired in a subdued tone. I am uncertain as to whether Sherry shares this assumption. What could have prompted Sherry to hold such a belief, if indeed she is aware of your involvement? Did she consent to your actions from the outset? Tracy revealed that Sherry was aware of the situation and approved of it from the beginning. On occasion, she even joined us, particularly when she accompanied him on business trips. During business trips with us, she consistently asserted that it was appropriate for me to enjoy Jack because I was a crucial contributor to his professional success. She expressed satisfaction with my role in providing him with support in the workplace while she took on the responsibility of caring for him at home. It was now my turn to take a seat. I experienced a sudden sense of dizziness. I was confused, so I was the only one who didn't know what about Allison. Allison has known about this for the last 4 years. She handles it well. Oh, Allison knows and she's good at it. I howled. That's not really what I meant. Does Sherry know that Allison is Jack's daughter? Sherry knows and she's okay with it. Amy is also aware of this information. It is evident that you have all derived considerable amusement from the misfortune of Rick on numerous occasions. Even my daughter, his own flesh and blood, was aware of the situation but chose not to inform me. It is truly remarkable. I hastily departed the residence and ultimately sought refuge in a nearby park, where I sat for a considerable duration, lost in thought. Tracy attempted to contact me on multiple occasions, but I did not respond. I received several calls from my cellular telephone, but I chose to allow them to go to voicemail. I remained in my current location and engaged in introspection. I have always considered myself to be a perceptive individual, yet in this instance, I was unable to discern the truth about my relationship with Tracy. I placed a high degree of trust in her, and I failed to recognize that she was engaging in infidelity. I was so confident in her loyalty that I likely overlooked numerous indications of her infidelity. It was evident for at least 19 years that there were obvious indications, yet I was remarkably uninformed. I was overcome with a multitude of thoughts, and as I exited the park and returned home, I was consumed by a whirlwind of questions. Upon entering the house through the garage, I observed Tracy in her customary position with a cup of tea in front of her. She extended the offer of a cup, but I respectfully declined and proceeded to the wine cabinet for something stronger. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat down in the chair opposite her. "I am profoundly sorry for hurting you," Tracy said quietly, looking at her hands. "I need to know the whole story now," I said, and there was more than a little irritation in my voice. "You love me. You have to tell me if you ever really loved me and if you respected me. Do not doubt my love for you." "Never." Tracy spoke with urgency in her voice. "I always loved you. I still love you. I just love Jack. Some people think that you can only love one person, but I know that is not true because I have loved two. Do not spare me. Continue." Tracy commenced her tenure at Softle approximately 1 year after its inception. As is often the case in nascent companies, employees were required to work extended hours and interacted closely on a personal level. This period was marked by a sense of excitement for her, and I recall her sharing with me the challenges she faced during our dates. We were engaged for approximately a year until she joined the company, which experienced a period of rapid growth and success. In the wake of this expansion, Tracy assumed a prominent role within the organization, becoming Jack's primary assistant. He was a dynamic leader and the face of the company. She was essentially the glue that held everything together. She excelled at many tasks, and Jack came to depend on her as his other half. At the same time that things were heating up between Tracy and I outside the office, things were heating up between Jack and Tracy in the office. She noted that it was as though her personal and professional lives were two parallel tracks, each running in its own direction. While Tracy and JX maintained a respectable facade in front of the rest of the office, they continued to engage in private discussions away from the others. These conversations covered a wide range of topics, from soup to nuts, encompassing everything from intimate matters to political debates. Tracy was 24 years old, striking in appearance with an athletic physique and long blonde hair. JX, on the other hand, was 34 years old, a well-built man with a kind smile and an almost old-fashioned charm. He was a physically imposing man with long wavy brown hair, an amiable smile, and a countenance that suggested a certain degree of maturity. Tracy recalled how, on the first occasion of their sexual intercourse, it had felt almost natural to do so on the leather couch in his office at the end of a long day. She stated that she never felt any guilt about sleeping with both JX and me, even when she and I got married a year later. The relationship she had with JX was similar to the one she and I had, but at the same time, it was also different. However, she was aware that she could never tell me about it. Regarding her feelings about infidelity, she loved both of us and wanted our relationship to continue. However, I was not informed about the affair. Jack revealed this information to Sherry approximately 2 months later, when he and Tracy realized that their romance would be long-lasting. He wanted to be completely honest with his wife, who had recently given birth to their first child. Sherry and Amy will always occupy the largest portion of his heart. Tracy stated that Jack informed Sherry about the affair but wanted to reserve a portion of his heart for Tracy. Sherry extended an invitation to Tracy to spend the weekend with her and Jack. I recalled how she had previously departed for the weekend under the pretext of her mother's illness. Following this weekend, she gave her blessing to the affair when Tracy became pregnant several years later. It was Sherry who took Tracy, who was experiencing difficulties, into her care. It was she who decided how the narrative would unfold if the baby was indeed Jack, given that Jack and I both had A+ blood, which solved the relatively straightforward issue. I was seldom present when the two girls were together, as their similarities were often observed. Sherry or Tracy would invariably make a witty remark, aware that I might otherwise become suspicious. Sherry regarded Tracy as a younger sister and was proud of Jack's second family. I was taken aback during Tracy's confession, as I had no recollection of it. She expressed no regret for her actions. Tracy paused and looked at me as if she expected me to say something. I was simply recalling the events. The only thing I could think of at that moment was to ask if he and Jacqueline took a break when we first got married and had sex almost every day of the week. She looked confused and looked away before finally answering, "No." She continued, "It was such an exciting time in my life. I had two handsome men loving me and wanting me, and I was extremely horny all the time. When Jax and I engaged in sexual intercourse, I always attempted to clean myself in anticipation of the possibility of further sexual activity. On occasion, I experienced instances of sexual intercourse with Jack and subsequent sexual intercourse with you. However, I made an effort to limit these instances and did not allow you to touch my intimate areas after Jack and I engaged in sexual intercourse. I found your actions to be considerate. After all these years, I have never made a direct comparison between you and Jack in terms of sexual attractiveness. I found you both to be capable lovers, kind and considerate, with similar heights. The sexual encounter with Jack was not the most optimal experience. It was, however, distinct from the typical sexual encounter due to the unique characteristics of each individual involved. I must acknowledge that I derived a certain degree of comfort from the realization that the sexual attraction was not merely driven by lust, but also by the recognition that she had formed a deep emotional bond with him. I was taught to believe in the concept of exclusive romantic attachment, where each partner is devoted to a single soulmate. Despite being the primary recipient of her intimate attention, I was also aware that there was another individual with whom she shared a profound connection. Tracy sat down, placed her tea on the table, and gazed into my eyes, attempting to discern my innermost thoughts. I was unable to provide an answer to her unasked question and lacked the eloquence to offer words of wisdom. I placed the bottle in the closet, the glass in the sink, and proceeded to retire to my room. I was certain that I would be unable to sleep that night. Approximately 5 minutes later, Tracy arrived at my bedside and lay down, curled up behind me. I feigned sleep to avoid having to say good night to her. I arose at my usual time, which was 5 a.m. The time was 12 a.m. I completed my morning routine and proceeded to work. When I left, Tracy was still in bed, indicating that she had no plans to go to Sofal. It is likely that she and Sherry will need to determine their next steps in light of Jock's absence. This is a challenge that they will need to address. I have always found solace in work when I am facing difficulties in other areas of my life. I hope that I am currently employed by Myona Pharmaceuticals, where I serve as the Vice President of Sales. Despite my age of 45, I represent a new phenomenon in this industry. My background is in chemistry, which sets me apart from the majority of my colleagues in sales, as I possess a deeper understanding of the manufacturing process and the specific functions of our products. I was even involved in the creation of one of our products, Kydal, a pill that helps for those who are overly horny. It was an efficacious product. I was able to generate a substantial profit from it for myself. Additionally, I receive a competitive salary, and with Trace's salary, we were financially secure. We owned an upscale house in a trendy area, drove nice cars, and took great vacations. Neither of us would suffer financially if we divorced. I previously considered the dreaded R word, but I have since realized that this is not the case. It is evident that the dissolution of my marriage was inevitable from the moment I discovered Trace's infidelity. Allison's departure from our family home, following her graduation from college, provided no compelling reason for us to remain together. The emotional trauma inflicted by Trace's actions rendered the mere act of cohabitation meaningless. My professional relationship with Arnold Kramer, which spans 18 years, commenced following my tenure as a chemist at another pharmaceutical company. My introduction to Ari occurred at an industry event. At the convention, we discussed a number of topics. He suggested that I consider a career in sales and subsequently offered me a position at his company. I was intrigued by the proposal and subsequently commenced employment with him. Ari's assessment of my abilities proved to be accurate, and we both benefited considerably from this arrangement. Not only do we work well together, but he is also a highly affable individual. Over time, we have developed a close, long-lasting friendship. Ari has been married to his wife, Lauren, for nearly 3 decades. They have 2 children. He has grown children and 4 or 5 grandchildren. He is 52 years old but acts like he is 30. He has a great deal of energy and is as sharp as a tack. He is not only intelligent but also does not hesitate to hire other intelligent people. I would like to believe that I am one of them. When I informed Ari that Tracy had been unfaithful to me and that I was contemplating divorce, he seemed devastated. He inquired whether I was certain that she had indeed been unfaithful, and I confirmed that she had. He did not inquire for further details and I did not volunteer any. We agreed that we would discuss the matter further at a later time. Nevertheless, he proceeded to. He then proceeded to retrieve a card from his file cabinet, which belonged to the law firm representing the company to which Eri was exceedingly loyal. Individuals who performed commendable work for Eri were held in high regard, and he placed considerable trust in the personnel at this company, who operated a modestly sized divorce division. He advised me to take as much time as I required, but I reassured him that I would only need to dedicate a few hours here and there. After all, I observed, we resided in a no-fault state, and both of us were committed to doing right by Allison. Furthermore, we both had our own retirement plans. We could each maintain our own accounts and divide the proceeds from the sale of the house. I failed to recognize this opportunity when I returned home from work that evening. Tracy was dressed for dinner, the meal was prepared, and a fine bottle of Mero was opened. Everything appeared so appetizing that I was reluctant to remind her that Jacqueline was the wine expert and that I preferred distilled spirits. It is challenging to recall all the details of both scenarios simultaneously. Tracy was her usual chatty self while we ate, acting as if nothing had changed between us. I waited approximately 10 minutes before finally using those famous 4 words that no spouse ever wants to hear: "We need to talk." She snapped at me, "No, we don't need that." I was shocked by her answer and her tone. I caught up with her, and she admitted that she had been having an affair with her boss for approximately a year. She was aware of my feelings regarding infidelity. How could she believe that I would remain with her? I had hoped that we could discuss the situation in a civilized manner before I took further action. I informed her that I would not agree to a divorce, despite her attempts to provoke a reaction. She responded with irritation, stating that our love for each other would prevent her from pursuing a divorce. She continued, claiming that I was being irrational and that I would ultimately ruin our relationship. She implied that my actions would be detrimental to our marriage, despite my attempts to maintain composure. Pride is hurt. I began to respond, but she interjected, "Until you discovered our relationship with Jack. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my love for you? Have I ever neglected you in any way? You received as much sexual intimacy as you desired, and I provided for you in every way, including physically, mentally, and emotionally. Aren't we each other's best friends? Had you not experienced this unfortunate incident, you would have remained devoted to me until your death. You would never. It is imperative that we return to this matter. I have discovered that your feelings for me are not as strong as you have led me to believe. This is evidenced by your willingness to engage in a relationship with another individual, both emotionally and physically. Despite being aware of the impropriety of your actions, you have chosen to conceal them from me. I do not consider 2 decades of deceit and infidelity to be a foundation for a loving relationship. It is troubling that you have engaged in sexual intercourse with another man for 2 decades and yet claim to have feelings for me. You are intimately close to him, just as you were to me. This raises questions about the nature of your relationship. It is evident that you have appropriated the entirety of your affection for him, which rightfully belongs to me. I had sufficient love for you as well. Tracy responded with a vehement assertion that he was capable of comprehending this reality. However, I refrained from disclosing this information to you, and now you are demonstrating that my actions were justified. Was I not sufficiently courageous? Was I not sufficiently resolute in my refusal to allow you to engage in a relationship with another individual while remaining married to me? This is utterly baseless. I was not so naive as to allow you to pursue such a course of action without opposition. Ultimately, the decision was yours. You were wholly self-absorbed, prioritizing your own desires and gratification. I am convinced that had I remained unaware of this, I would have lived out the rest of my days in blissful ignorance, regarded as a foolish individual. You may inscribe this epitaph on my tombstone: "Here lies Rick Avondale, the most fortunate of men, who believed life was wonderful, unaware that his wife had 2 husbands." The funeral and burial took place 3 days later. On Monday, I was absent from the household. I arose at my usual time and proceeded to my place of employment. Upon returning home, I observed that Tracy and Allison were still attired in the same garments they had worn to the funeral. I approached my daughter, who was home from college, and attempted to embrace her. Given that she had not been present for approximately 2 months, I was unsuccessful in my attempt. Initially, she withdrew from my physical contact, then she turned her back to me and departed the residence quietly weeping. Tracy placed her hand on my forearm. In the absence of any indication to the contrary, I would have been inclined to leave the situation as it was. However, the circumstances were no longer normal. I emitted a low growl and proceeded to the bedroom, selecting a few days' worth of clothes, toothbrush, and toiletries. I then left the house. Tracy began contacting me almost immediately, and I permitted all calls to go to voicemail. However, I must acknowledge Allison's actions, as she did not feign ignorance like her mother. She ultimately determined that I was the antagonist in this situation and that she would exact a significant price from me. If her objective was to inflict emotional distress, she had succeeded. Not only was I not the biological father of her child, but she made it evident that she no longer regarded me as her emotional father as well. The situation deteriorated further on Tuesday when I took advantage of my free time to visit the bank and divide our finances into separate accounts. A new credit card was opened in my name and an appointment was made with the law office Eri had recommended. I was seen on Thursday, despite having not slept for 3 days. The lawyer, Mike Squishy, was a disappointment. I had hoped for a more capable legal representative. There was not much to discuss and I explained the matter in detail. I informed him that I wished to separate from my wife as soon as possible and that I wished to initiate legal proceedings against Jax's estate for alimony. If Allison was no longer my child, then I would be willing to accept that her biological father should be held financially responsible for her upbringing. I was weary of continuing to act in a manner that I deemed to be disadvantageous. I informed Mike that I did not foresee any issues with this course of action. However, if Tracy was determined to avoid divorce, the judge might order mandatory counseling, which could potentially prolong the proceedings. I advised him to proceed with this course of action. On the following Monday, Tracy was served with the papers. I surmised that this occurred at approximately 10 a.m. The time was 7 a.m. Given that the hour was 10, at 9:30 a.m. on Monday, our receptionist informed me that an irate Tracy was online. I did not answer any of Tracy's calls or messages on my cell phone and instructed the secretary to send her calls directly to my voicemail. However, I knew I could not avoid her forever, so one day I told Marlene, our senior secretary, to put her through. When she called, I perceived her to be an extraordinary individual. I terminated the call as soon as she concluded her initial expletive-laden tirade. A second call followed shortly after, and I again terminated the call, this time wondering how long it would take for her to recognize the necessity of civility in order to engage in discourse with me. A third call ensued. When I answered, she began to speak in a low voice, indicating that she was attempting to maintain control of her emotions. She proceeded to inform me that she had been trying to remain calm and that she was eager to discuss the matter further. I responded in a similarly composed manner, expressing my willingness to engage in dialogue. She then requested that I contact my lawyer, Mike Squishy, at the provided number and schedule an appointment. She also suggested that I might benefit from bringing along my own legal counsel. It would be advisable to bring your own lawyer with you, as this could speed up the process. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Until then, I continued to live in a nearby motel. I made occasional visits to my old house to cut the grass and to collect mail and other belongings. When Tracy first saw me drive up to the house, she attempted to greet me as though she were my late husband appeared and began embracing me in the driveway. I physically repelled her and proceeded into the house. Did you feel compelled to divulge the intricacies of our marital discord in such a public setting? She inquired. I retorted, if you consider me such an unfit spouse, then I implore you to initiate the divorce. The meeting with the attorneys was scheduled for Friday afternoon at 3, as was his custom. The gentleman in question allowed Tracy to present her case first. She stated that she loved him completely and was simply leaving a little room in her heart for Jacko. She then asked him if he was prepared to discard 20 years of shared history because of this. He replied that the depth of their love meant that they could not continue as husband and wife. It is difficult to comprehend how one could view this as anything other than a complete betrayal of trust, the very foundation of marriage. You were aware of the wrongfulness of your actions, yet you betrayed my trust to achieve your desired outcome, both physically and emotionally. He was aware and accepted this, while I was deceived for reasons that remain unclear. No one suggested that I engage in sexual relations with his wife. This divorce is not a personal issue for me, it is about your selfishness and betrayal. I would never accept sharing you physically with another man, but sharing your affection for another man is not the sole determining factor in a relationship. The pain of infidelity is more acute than that of a mere sexual encounter with a handsome stranger. This man was my partner and the father of our child. His actions were driven by love for me, yet I was denied the knowledge of his infidelity. This did not rectify the situation. Both of us stole from me. It is fortunate that he died of a heart attack on that day, as if he had lived, I would have killed him. Tracy gasped as I made my final statement. I was already in tears. Despite the gravity of our situation, you have never expressed remorse for your actions. On me, I continued. You apologized for hurting me and I know you're sorry you got caught, but I don't think you're the least bit sorry for what you did. Rick, I know you can do your part. Don't go through this divorce. She said, my part. This was our marriage. Tracy, there wasn't supposed to be my part. This was supposed to be just us forever. Mike looked at Tracy's lawyer and said, I think we are done here. Your client must sign the documents and return them to us. An elderly African-American woman, the American woman nodded grimly and extended her hand for Mike to shake. Over the following 2 weeks, a few minor details were resolved. Approximately 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. 2 days after the divorce became official, Mike filed a lawsuit against Jack's estate for what was essentially child support and college expenses. However, the lawsuit was filed in a way that made it sound more like a demand for alimony. I would likely not have pursued this course of action had Allison not made it clear to me following the funeral that she wished to terminate our relationship. I had raised this child as my own for 18 years, yet I was afforded no respect in return. I believe that she had 4 years to reflect on the situation after Tracy provided her with the relevant information. In her eyes, I was no better than a fool, so I have been deprived of 14 years of paternal respect. The complete fatherly love I had invested was effectively nullified, and I was not offended when Mike suggested replacing it with financial compensation. I was willing to accept this solution, and I was a phone call away from Sherry when she was served. However, instead of contacting me, Tracy called Sherry. Sherry likely assumed that I would be more accepting of Tracy's message, but this assumption was misguided. This is simply another method of retaliation against me. Are you experiencing financial difficulties? Tracy inquired when I answered the phone. Hello, Mrs. Avondale. It is kind of you to call. Do you realize that your actions make you appear to be a disgraceful individual? Do you understand that I invested and expended my resources on another man's child? For 18 years, Sherry and Jack have derided me, and now this other man's child views me as a fool. I am indifferent to your opinions. I terminated the call without saying goodbye. I conveyed to Sherry my stance and how tenacious I can be when I am correct about something. After the LW attempted to negotiate with Mick, it is noteworthy that the individual in question wrote me a check for $1 million. As it transpired, a couple of months later, Sherry was in a position to easily afford that million because she sold Softal to a Japanese company for $8 million. Given that Japan was no longer involved in the running of the company, this was probably a sound business decision. However, as veteran journalist Paul Harvey once observed, there is more to the story. 2 days following the sale of Softal, a sum of $2 million was transferred into my account in the Cayman Islands. This represented my fee for assisting Nakatomi Limited in acquiring Softal, a transaction that I had facilitated 9 months earlier. In order to formalize this arrangement, I signed an agreement stipulating that, regardless of the circumstances or my role in the transaction, I would receive a payment if Nakatomi acquired Softal by a specified date. If the acquisition does not take place by that date, the deal would be terminated. You may be wondering what role I played in the Softal deal. It is a complex matter, but the point is that I was not entirely honest with you earlier in the story. While the majority of the story was based on truth, some of it was based on speculation. The film was a commercial success, directed by me, a man who seemed completely unaware of the situation. In fact, I was an uninformed individual for approximately a month before Jack's demise. I was then approached by a legal representative from Nakatomi Lti, who requested my assistance in negotiating a deal with Jack for Softal. The rationale behind this request was unclear, particularly given my lack of experience in such matters. My wife is Jack's right hand. I inquired in a seemingly innocuous manner, because we are aware of your intellectual capabilities and believe you will rise to the occasion and be duly rewarded for outsmarting the individual who has been deceiving you behind your back for years. The lawyer responded by saying that I was shocked, which was an understatement. Tracy had been unfaithful to me and to this individual. From Japan, I was aware of the situation. Are you suggesting that I am mistaken? It transpired that Nakatomi Limited had been investigated by a number of companies. When conducting their research, they adopt a comprehensive approach, examining a range of sources. They were able to ascertain details of Jack and Tracy and how Sherry and her daughters fit into the narrative. They correctly assumed that I would be willing to assist them, but the task had to be completed swiftly, as they were considering a number of other software firms. I was required to fulfill the order within 9 months. Initially, they presented me with evidence of Tracy's infidelity, including photographs, videos, and phone records. I was in possession of all the necessary evidence to bury the two of them, but I was motivated to act by the prospect of a $2 million reward. I am in a position of financial stability, and the money was not a necessity for me. However, the offer was made, and I was presented with the opportunity to assist in the removal of Jaku from her position at the company. I would have been willing to help for free at that point, but I was disinclined to inform them that I needed to determine my course of action and ensure that the funds would be accessible to me following the dissolution of the marriage, as we reside in a community property state. My initial inclination was to compose myself before taking any action, as my immediate reaction might reveal my true intentions. My honest first thought was to wait. I considered various options, including waiting until their next meeting and then confronting them, but I was reluctant to remain Bubba's cellmate indefinitely. I needed to devise a strategy that would allow me to maintain my freedom and avoid any further complications. I decided to play it cool and maintain my outward appearance of ignorance, as I had been doing for the past 2 decades. I informed Ari of my discovery regarding Tracy. I was taken aback, but I did not divulge how I had discovered the truth. One evening, we remained awake until the early hours, consuming a bottle of Don Julio tequila and discussing potential courses of action. After drinking approximately half the bottle, he gazed at me with sincerity and stated, "It is regrettable that the individual who invented a Keitel tolerates such behavior from his spouse. If your wife is engaging in sexual intercourse with another man, you should administer this medication to her." That is when I had an epiphany. I did not inform Ari for obvious reasons. I did not want him to know that I was using this medication. I thought to myself, I should administer this medication to this woman. I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Cockrell has several beneficial qualities. Unlike many other medications, it has few contraindications. However, there is one notable exception: this drug should not be taken by men. While it effectively calms the female libido, it has been observed to cause a spike in blood pressure in men, which can potentially lead to a fatal heart attack. I needed to administer a portion of the drug to Jack. Jack and I are members of the same golf course, and we occasionally play together with 2 other individuals. I scheduled a round of golf for the following Saturday, with a planned stop at a restaurant for lunch after the first 9 holes. The first 9 holes proceeded without incident. We had approximately 90 minutes for lunch and drinks before our second 9. It should be noted that I am a proficient salesman. While we were dining and imbibing, I observed and inquired in a casual manner, "Are you well, my friend? You appear somewhat fatigued." The other 2 men and I were approximately a decade his junior. Jack was aware of his condition, and thus, the question had a somewhat dispiriting effect on him. I could discern the mental processes occurring within him when I suggested that we could postpone the subsequent half by approximately 30 minutes to allow him some recuperation time. "I am merely fatigued," he replied, "but there is no need to adjust our plans on my account." In fact, I did not perceive him to be distressed, yet I was now exploiting his insecurities regarding his status as the eldest member of the group. I retrieved a small bag of unmarked white pills from my left front pants pocket, which I keep for my personal use. I consume one of these pills daily with lunch, and it helps me throughout the remainder of the day. I provided Jackie with a bag containing 5 tablets. She was instructed to take them for the following few days. If she found them agreeable, she was told that I would bring her more on our next meeting. Jacques removed 1 tablet from the bag, swallowed it, and washed it down with bourbon and ice. He then beat his chest in a manner reminiscent of a monkey. He then let out a loud scream and released the other men. "I'm cheerful as ever," he said cheerfully. In fact, for a few minutes he probably actually felt energized. Higher blood pressure pumps you up a little, which is why athletes take heart drugs to enhance their performance. However, too much of a good thing can have adverse effects. For those wondering why I gave him a small baggie rather than a bottle of pills or a box of pills, the reason is that when he's done taking the pills, he'll simply discard the baggie. Rather than retaining the medication in his pocket, where it might be discovered by others, he opted to place it in his underwear, a decision that proved fortuitous on Wednesday night. For those who have been paying attention, this means that the 5 tablets will last until Wednesday, which was a typical night for the Jack Try Love Festival. The elevated blood pressure, which is a consequence of sexual intercourse with a woman, rather than his wife, in combination with the medications that cause his blood pressure to rise, if spike and you have a heart attack, the likelihood of survival is minimal. However, given that the incident appeared to be a typical myocardial infarction and that our community lacks the resources of a large homicide unit, the only means of investigating the matter is if there are indications of foul play. Consequently, I endeavored to assume the role of the newly cuckolded spouse to the best of my abilities, emulating my actions when I initially learned of the affair a month prior. I must admit that I was even gratified by my performance. 2 days after the funds were deposited into my account and immediately transferred to another account, I extended an invitation to Ari and his wife to a lavish dinner. The ostensible purpose of the dinner was to express gratitude to Ari for his exemplary leadership and support during my time of need. However, I did not inform him that the actual objective was to lay the foundation for my revenge, with Jax no longer present in both women's lives. This resulted in a notable weakening of the bond between Tracy and Sherry, particularly when Sherry had the opportunity to. It is important to consider the fact that Jacqueline died practically on Tracy. I was also informed that Tracy's inability to persuade me to drop my claim against the estate for child support caused considerable distress to Sherry. However, it seems that Tracy was not aware that the money in question was no longer accessible to her, as we had already undergone a divorce at that point. Sherry subsequently terminated Tracy's employment shortly after she had paid me. It is rumored that an affair between the demise of Jacqueline and Tracy effectively brought an end to Tracy's professional pursuits in business administration. It is perhaps not advantageous to have a romantic involvement with one's superior, particularly when the latter passes away in a compromising position. However, it is important to empathize with Tracy's situation. Despite the unfortunate turn of events, she will not be facing immediate financial challenges and will be able to provide support to her daughter. I made it clear to her that I was not interested in pursuing a relationship with her after Jacqueline's passing. My rejection was not a one-time occurrence. However, on several occasions, I have been the recipient of the consequences of my actions. I have raised her, provided for her, coached her soccer team, and attended all of her dance recitals. Consequently, I have decided that I will not repeat this mistake. I consider myself to be doing well for a man who lost the love of his life after 20 years. It took me some time, but eventually, I began dating again. However, I am uncertain whether I will ever be able to fully trust a woman again or find one who is a suitable match. The relationship I had with Tracy is a distant memory. It is important to note that I am a wealthy individual with an estimated net worth of approximately $5 million. Consequently, I have chosen to retire from my professional pursuits and dedicate my time to special projects initiated by May. It is possible that I may one day develop a revolutionary medication that can effectively identify instances of infidelity in spouses. Such a discovery would undoubtedly have a profound impact on humanity. To ensure that your subsequent relationship does not encounter similar challenges, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel. This will help you to avoid the pitfalls I have experienced. Please allow me to proceed with the next story, which will offer a more compelling insight into the complexities of relationships.